Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Legislative Review Committee meeting of the Athens-Clarke County Unified Government. I'm Russell Edwards, your chair. We have some minutes from our last meeting. Is there any objection to the minutes? Hearing none, the minutes are accepted. Let's look at the agenda here. Yep. We've got a lot of local dignitaries joining us today to examine the mayor's charge for the marijuana penalty options. And so, Assistant Manager Jones, if you'd like to take it away and go ahead and facilitate the contributions of our guests, be my guest.
Thank you, Commissioner Edwards. And I'd like to quickly thank D.A. Gonzalez, Solicitor Chisholm, and I believe Mr. Donnelly might be on the call. If he's not on the call, I'm sure he will join. There you are. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to share my screen real quick, and we can go ahead and get started. We have a presentation for LRC today. Can you see my screen? Good. Okay.
Got it.
Nikki, you're in, I think, like, you know how you can put it in presentation mode?
Go to presenter mode. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can you see the presentation now?
Not yet.
No, it's not.
It does look full screen though, which is good. Maybe if you advance one slide, maybe that's the first one that's blank template.
No, it's not presenter mode. All right, hold on a second. Sorry. Uh-oh. It's spinning on me.
Oh boy.
I know. Technology fail.
Yeah. You'd think it would text it more when you're in, composition mode versus presentation.
Oh, man.
Nikki, can you try to stop sharing and then reshare?
I'm trying to, and it won't let me. It won't let me get out. Oh, no. All right, hold on. Let me try to force this thing. Oh, gosh.
Commissioner Edwards, would you like us to practice our Roberts rules while we wait?
Hmm.
Take that as a no.
Whoa, sorry. Sarah, can you possibly share your screen? Do you have it by chance?
Did you make any changes to it since yesterday?
I did not.
Okay, I can share mine.
Thank you. Sorry about that, y'all. I think I might need a new computer.
We'll put that on the budget.
Whoop, whoop.
Sorry about that again. So the mayor has asked the LRC to examine. Sarah, can you advance to the next slide, please? To examine penalty options that could be embedded in local ordinances as an alternative to state charges. So we have the folks from the judicial offices here to kind of help shepherd the conversation if needed. Of course, we also have our attorney's office here to shepherd the conversation, and then we're also going to provide some information from the police department. But first, what we'll do is kind of go through the comparative analysis that we were asked to do. We were asked to do, I think, maybe 5 or 6 different municipalities. We ended up doing 9. I believe Sarah already shared that information with you, but we're going to quickly go through several of them that we found pertinent to Athens-Clarke County. So these are the local governments that we examined. You can see City of Atlanta, Macon-Bibb, City of Chamblee, City of Augusta, Chatham County, Doraville, Clarkston, Savannah, and Fairburn. So generally speaking, here are the findings. The vast majority of them focused on, if not all, focused on 1 ounce or less of marijuana. 5 out of the 9 ordinances had a maximum fine. And then all 9 ordinances included language that prohibited, conviction of persons for marijuana possession. And, real quickly, the City of Atlanta, very comparable to us, Macon-Bibb very comparable to us, and City of Savannah very comparable to us in many different ways. I'll touch on some of the things that they looked at. They all agreed that 1 ounce or less is what they would focus on. The establishment of their ordinances are pretty interesting. So City of Atlanta, 2017, City of Savannah, 2018, and Macon-Bibb, 2019. Also, maximum fine in both of those, or all 3 of those, was $150. But in 2 of those local governments, specifically Atlanta and Macon-Bibb, were $75. And all of them agreed that this would not be punishable by imprisonment. So next, we'll go on to the ACC PD data. Deputy Chief, would you take us away?
Sure. Thank you for having me. So what you can see, the data that we went back and looked at is based on our current records management system, and we looked back to 2018 through 2021. And so our practices basically indicate that we've made 291 arrests for misdemeanor marijuana during that time frame. And of those, 77% were accompanied by additional charges, whatever they were, whether they were felonies or misdemeanors. And so really only 23% of the cases in the time period between 2018 and 2021 were misdemeanor marijuana charges where that was the sole charge made in that particular case. And only a handful of those 15 arrests during that time frame, were accompanied by firearms. And then this really only reflects about 2% of our total arrests during the same time period. There were in excess of 12,000 arrests during that time. So it's actually a very small percentage of the arrests that we make in totality. And a couple of other key points too is that, I think it's the next slide actually, if you move forward to the next slide. Oh, no, it's not this slide. Oh, so this just gives you a breakdown. This gives you a breakdown kind of each year of what type of arrests we're making. So you can kind of see that in comparison to the marijuana arrests. And what you see is between 2019 and 2020, there's a very significant drop in the number of misdemeanor marijuana arrests. And that drop actually occurred in July of 2019, and that was when the state introduced the hemp law. And that kind of affected our practice in terms of whether or not we made arrests in misdemeanor cases. And so as you can see, since that time period, we've been making very few arrests in comparison to the time period before that. And that's just been in practice already. What should be noted as well, since that time, of those 27 arrests in 2020 to 2021, only a single case was for misdemeanor marijuana only as a sole charge. All of the additional arrests out of those 27, so 26 of the 27, were accompanied by additional charges. And the majority of those were felony charges. The single case since 2020 where there was a misdemeanor marijuana arrest as the sole charge, that was actually part of a larger investigation. And that was a single individual within multiple arrests as part of a larger investigation. So it was a kind of a unique outlier. But what you can effectively see is that we haven't been making any arrests in practice solely for misdemeanor marijuana since that hemp law change. I guess next slide. And so I guess this just actually displays that in a slightly different graphic. You can see the dramatic drop off. And like I said, that actually starts when you look at the month by month data in July of 2019. So next slide. And this just highlights what I mentioned a minute ago about the single case. And that was part of a larger investigation. That's pretty much it for the data. Does anybody have any questions on that data or anything else related to the police department's actions?
Yes, Deputy Chief, could you elucidate a little bit why those arrests dropped off so precipitously post the hemp law?
Right. So what happened is Georgia changed the law related to hemp, and what that specifically had to do with was the level of THC in the plant, and we had no meaningful way of distinguishing one plant that was deemed marijuana because it had a THC in excess of the limit, and then the next plant that was actually hemp because it had a low level of THC. We just didn't have a meaningful way of making that distinguishment. And so what we decided as a practice, and what was really mirrored across the state, is because we could not test it, we had no way ultimately of prosecuting a misdemeanor marijuana case as opposed to it being legalized hemp. And so we weren't making those cases. Now, that didn't apply the same when it came to felony cases. And so what we had decided to do from a practical standpoint was to continue making charges in felony cases or taking out warrants after the fact once we were able to make some distinguishment in the future. But those were only felony cases. We were talking about either trafficking or distribution level of marijuana. So it was really just a practical issue of, we couldn't test it, and therefore, it was a low-level misdemeanor charge, and so we didn't. We just pivoted on making arrests there.
Thanks. Anybody else?
Yeah, I just want to clarify. This is just the data for ACCPD, right? So other departments that might be operating in the same jurisdiction, we don't have that data is not included in this.
That's correct. This is only ACCPD.
Great.
Is the number of charges, is that the number of arrests or the number of cases filed in court?
Those are the number of arrests. I don't have anything related to whether or not anything was ultimately accused or indicted or what any dispositions were in court. And so I would refer to our prosecutors on that.
No, I just wanted to make sure I was reading.
Well, let me clarify one thing real fast. In this chart you're looking at, it may be a little confusing. What you see in the white blocks between felony, misdemeanor, and unknown, those are actual charges. And so you may have what's reflected there, 2 or more charges in a single arrest, because we only made about 12,400 arrests during that time period, but some obviously carried multiple charges. What you see in the light blue, those are individual, effectively they're charges, but they're cases where marijuana was charged during a single arrest. So that reflects ultimately the number of arrests where misdemeanor marijuana was charged.
All right, great.
Sorry, one more question. Does this include, this is just for marijuana, the substance, not drug-related object, right? Because I saw some localities also mention drug-related object in their decrim
Yes,
ordinance?
this is specifically marijuana, the substance under the particular statute, 161330 that applies to that.
Okay, thanks.
And Commissioner Hool, I asked the PD to focus on marijuana because that was specifically the mayor's charge. And going on to the judicial officials, we asked the judicial officials to join us today. If they wanted to add something, they certainly can. If they wanted to kind of sit back and listen and respond later, they can certainly do that as well. But we thought it'd be beneficial for them to be here, listening in, and maybe to even respond to some of the questions that you may have for them. So next up would be Solicitor Chisholm. He provided some pros and cons related to this issue.
Great. Take it away, Solicitor. I think you're muted, sir.
Sorry about that. Before I get into these pros and cons, we worked on the marijuana ordinance back in 2019, and I think this list of pros and cons that I had developed began when I was sitting down going through it in my own head. And so when I was asked if I wanted to provide any slides, I thought these might be helpful for the discussion, because this is kind of the discussion I was having when I was going through all of this about 3 years ago. Before I move on, I will say I wanted to add just a little bit of additional information on what we just received in terms of case numbers. We ran our own case numbers internally, and we have since over the last 2 years, 2020, 2021, we have received 6 cases where the only charge was misdemeanor marijuana. And I know Harrison was going through the arrests. One of those that we have was an arrest. We had 3 more cases from Athens-Clarke County, but they were citations. So the person was not arrested. They were handed a citation. And then we have 1 UGA PD arrest for misdemeanor marijuana and 1 GSP arrest for marijuana, misdemeanor marijuana. All 6 of these cases were dismissed by my office. And a little bit more about why, when these cases at this point are not prosecutable. And that's why I had to amend the pros section a little bit to write in there, assuming that a marijuana ordinance is prosecutable, because at the moment, misdemeanor marijuana is not prosecutable. We can't distinguish between whether the substance is hemp or whether the substance is marijuana. To do so, we would have to have some type of testing to be able to do that, because hemp is defined by having no more than 0.03% of THC in, or 0.3% THC in the product, versus marijuana, which is some amount of THC more than that. So we can't distinguish. And if we can't distinguish, then we can't prove that it's marijuana. So we really aren't able to carry our burden. We're not able to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. But if we did have an ordinance, yes, there's no arrest that comes with that. You can see all the pros here, and you could avoid the jail time. You're paying a fine. Definitely, it's less onerous on the citizen, and it also could provide time and cost savings to the court as well, because these are cases that we typically aren't spending a lot of time on anyway, but especially in the time of trying to overcome some backlogs, not having to prosecute these particular cases is a big help, but we're not having to prosecute them now anyway. And John, you asked were the cases dismissed prior to accusation. I'm thinking that they were. It looks like most of them may have been down in municipal court to begin with, and plus then you have the 3 that were citations, so they would have just been dismissed off the citations. And when those cases are dismissed, they are dismissed with restriction. If there was an arrest. Anybody have any questions about kind of this pros section here, or why it is we can't prosecute marijuana right now?
I guess just to clarify, there are still folks coming through your office. There are still cases coming through your office based on arrests, even though you can't prosecute. Is that correct?
What do you mean coming through my office?
Because people are still getting arrested for this.
Well, they're not getting
even though you can't prosecute it.
They're not getting arrested. That's the thing. As Harrison pointed out, we only had one arrest, and that's what I'm showing. Well, one arrest for Athens-Clarke County PD, one arrest for GSP, and one arrest for UGA. The officers, by and large, they all know that you can't make this charge right now. And I'm not sure why those three particular officers made the charge that time. And I'm not sure why the others wrote citations. But by and large, the officers know that this just isn't a prosecutable charge at the moment. And if they do, for some reasons, an error, make the charge, then we have to dismiss it.
Okay.
Next
All right.
slide.
I reckon carry on.
As I point out here, that the need for the ordinance is diminished. I mean, the purpose of the ordinance was trying to minimize the impact it had on citizens. Having that marijuana charge conviction on a history does have negative impact on citizens that are trying to get housing. And also any type of funding, especially like scholarships or things like that. Those charges can be a real hindrance. But at this point, we just aren't prosecuting it. And I don't anticipate this problem going away in the near future. So the 2019 Georgia Hemp Farming Act was signed by the governor in the summer of 2019. The legislature in 2020 went back into this statute and made some changes. During that legislative session, the Prosecuting Attorney's Council told legislators that there needed to be a solution to the problem that prevents prosecutors from prosecuting misdemeanor marijuana. Prosecuting Attorney's Council provided language to solve that issue. That language was not included in the 2020 changes that were put into place in the hemp bill. And so there was not a fix in 2020. In 2021, the legislature again went into this statute and made more changes, and again did not fix the issues that were caused by the original statute. So this year there are no proposed changes that I'm aware of to the hemp bill or the hemp statute. And my information from on this from the Capitol is that there will not be any more changes to this statute. That there's not going to be a fix to be able to prosecute misdemeanor marijuana again. So I don't anticipate this going away. There are some jurisdictions out there that are prosecuting it still, but they've received funding to get special testing equipment or testing labs to do the work. But I don't know how many of those jurisdictions exist. I don't think there's many of them. Anybody have any questions about that? Because I know I've been asked that question before. about will there be a fix, and if so, when?
Commissioner Edwards, I see Mr. Donnelly's hand up.
Go ahead, Mr. Donnelly.
Yeah, you touched on my question, CR, and my question was going to be, is law enforcement requesting more specialized equipment to be able to test for the percentage, to distinguish between the percentages between legal hemp and illegal marijuana?
At this time, not to my knowledge.
Mr. Donnelly, I might be able to answer that for you. I'll confirm it, but to my understanding, the GBI, once the Hemp Farming Act was put in place and this was recognized as an issue, they did take steps to create a test to be able to distinguish hemp from marijuana. And I believe that they've technically been able to distinguish it since September of 2019. So they can, tell us whether it's hemp or marijuana. Although they can make that distinguishment from a practical standpoint, they're reserving those tests or that type of testing for felony cases only. And so in response to Solicitor Chisholm, he's correct. They won't test it as a practical matter for misdemeanor cases. And so we can't prosecute a misdemeanor case if they won't test it. But they do have the technology. They're just reserving it for felony level marijuana.
And Harrison, you did a way better job answering that question than I did. That was much more informative. Thank you for clarifying that.
But in recent history, the testing has been done in-house, so to speak, that is at the police department for marijuana. And so I'm wondering if the police department is requesting the more specialized testing. And then also, when you say they're reserving the more accurate testing for just felony cases, I can imagine cases that involve less than an ounce, but where the police suspect intent to distribute, which would be a felony. And so I'm wondering how that might factor into the exercising the discretion over the testing. I don't know if you have any thoughts on either.
Well, to your first question, we have not explored acquiring any of the testing technology to distinguish hemp and marijuana in our department. From a practical standpoint, I think it really depends on the nature of the case and how the officer, the detective, would charge the case. And so you're correct. We may have the evidence to demonstrate that while somebody has, for example, 27 grams of marijuana, which would be less than a complete ounce, we can demonstrate that they are distributing it or something to that effect. And so it actually be felony possession because of the actions. But it's really, that's, I guess, a case-by-case basis. But it's just a policy stance from the GBI that they're not willing to do that testing unless it's a felony case, however that case is made.
Commissioner Edwards, I believe Commissioner Wright has her hand raised.
Go for it.
I was jumping down in the list of cons. Is that appropriate for me to just jump down to one I have a question about, or
Sure.
Okay. Thank you guys for this. This is very, very informative. Having this team here to present stuff. My biggest concern it lays down in the last comment here because of the different police forces, so to speak. If you could elaborate, the municipal ordinance is not enforceable by the UGA's police department. The school district also has a police department. I'm thinking that Athens-Tech does too, and then of course the Georgia State Patrol. Can you tell us about that to make sure we're clear about what we would do versus what they can also join in on enforcing or not enforcing?
So, yeah, municipal ordinance, State Patrol, I mean, they're operating only in UGA. They're only operating on state statutes. They don't have any control over municipal ordinances. It's just like you go out on a game day and you'll see folks with open containers on UGA property, but as soon as they step off that property, and onto county property, then Athens-Clarke County can cite them for the open containers because we have an open container ordinance. But that ordinance doesn't extend to UGA property, which is where UGA is that's their jurisdiction, is their property, or within 500 yards of it. But they have no jurisdiction, neither does GSP over ordinance violations.
Okay, and so then the school district would be under the same, and then the same as potentially our other college campuses.
I don't recall ever receiving a marijuana case from the school district. I think when that occurs in the past, it has been called in, and Athens-Clarke County has been brought in on those cases. That's pretty rare to see that. But I'm trying to remember back the last time we had a case like that. But I really think that Athens-Clarke County has been called in to address it, and not the school district police department itself.
Okay, that helps with that, as well as the student code of conduct, I'm sure, also has some play there with what they can do. That's the main part for me, is just making sure that and for what you're saying at the state level, it all boils down to really that not being able to differentiate between the hemp and the marijuana at this low level of non-being a felony complicated arrest.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Gould?
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to clarify that even if the officer making an arrest or otherwise brings whatever charge they bring forth, it then comes through your office, and as is often the case, there's kind of a negotiation between the two sides, right, the defense and the prosecution. So even if an arresting officer is not citing the local ordinance, when it comes to the negotiation between the two sides in the court, the local ordinance can be cited. Is that correct? Maybe that's a question for the combination of Solicitor Chisholm and Mr. Donnelly.
So I guess I'm trying to make sure I understand. Are you saying if a person was charged originally with the state statute and they come to court and we negotiate and say, well, we'll charge an ordinance instead, can that happen? Is that what you're saying?
Can that happen? And also, I mean, that does happen as I understand it, but yeah, can that happen in this case, I guess?
That has happened where both parties have agreed, and we just say that this is the best resolution to the scenario. We have done that before, yes.
Okay.
But
thanks, yeah.
Again, right now, we wouldn't, if we got let's back it up and say we got a marijuana ordinance violation. Right now, we wouldn't even prosecute that. We would dismiss it because even though it's now an ordinance, we'd still have to prove that it's marijuana. We still have that responsibility. If the person that was charged was saying, you charged me with an ordinance, but that's not marijuana, or at least you can't prove it, and then they're right. We have no way of proving it, so we're left with dismissing it.
Sure.
And
yeah, I understand that part, but I guess thinking about how policies elsewhere can change, people in charge of departments can change, equipment can appear and be used or not for different cases. Like, it's encouraging to hear how things are currently going. But if what we can do is, legislatively advance something that ensures it continues to go in a similar way, even if those other things change, I see that as valuable. But I guess the point here I wanted to make is if we're talking about, the Athens-Clarke County Police Department is more in the purview of this local government. And so they might go about things in a way that's different from the other departments that Commissioner Wright mentioned. But even if those other departments do go about things differently and do choose to focus on making arrests or issuing charges that would be different from what the Clarke County Police Department does, having an ordinance on the local level on the books would enable the attorneys on the defense and prosecution to bear that in mind when negotiating how to move forward. And I think what I'm hearing from you is that that is the case.
That is something that can happen. Like we've had disorderly conduct state statute charged, somebody at a football game, and so they got a state statute, and sometimes we have done an ordinance on that before, but everybody has agreed to it. So that is something, yes, that can happen, but one of the things that is also at this point, and I've got here in the cons, that even if you get the municipal ordinance, you still, according to the statute, they still have to transmit that to GCIC, so it still would show up.
Yeah, I guess the other thing I'm wondering, when we see cons here, I mean, are these cons about having it at all, or are these just pointing to why it might be less sweepingly effective than it would have been years ago? But it doesn't. Most of what I'm reading here doesn't say that it's lacking any utility at all.
Well, right now there's limited, if any, utility. One of the concerns I have, and I understand what you're saying about, well, what if you get a police department that says, oh, well, we want to seek funding from the commission to start testing this. That certainly could change. But right now, if this commission can absolutely, if they want to try to pass an ordinance, I mean, that's your decision. I do think if you did pass an ordinance, a con to that would be that it would send mixed messages to the law enforcement, because right now they have all been told that this is not a prosecutable charge. So if you do have the ordinance and you've passed it, and now they're getting information, well, okay, I guess that means we can now somehow prosecute marijuana, but we'd have to do it with an ordinance, which, I mean, that can be resolved through training. If you do the ordinance, you're going to have to make sure that training is supplied to Athens-Clarke County police officers. Otherwise, you could end up with a situation where they mistakenly give a ticket, believing that they could, and if the person pays it off at the ticket window, now they've got this conviction for a municipal ordinance marijuana charge. We would do the best we can to try to catch all of those before that happen, because we would still want it dismissed, because we don't want people paying fines for things that we can't prove. But that's an issue that I think the commission should be aware of and think about how to address that with our law enforcement.
So, Solicitor Chisholm, am I hearing you correctly that it's your position that if we adopt something like a parallel ordinance that creates a ticketable charge for marijuana possession, that might actually increase enforcement, increase charges?
I don't know. I don't know the answer, but I mean, it is entirely possible for officers to, I mean, if you're an officer now, all of a sudden you're hearing about this misdemeanor marijuana or marijuana ordinance, I can understand where an officer would think it might be okay. Okay, well, I'm not going to charge the state statute, but I'll charge this municipal ordinance. And I don't know if that's going to cause an increase in numbers. I don't know the answer to that. I just know if you don't want that to happen, it's going to take some training and at least information to the police department to say this case, these charges still aren't prosecutable, but we want to make sure we had this ordinance on the books in case one day it becomes prosecutable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that point specifically? I mean, I'm looking at even our local officials, even John Donnelly or anybody else.
I have a comment, Chair Edwards.
Okay.
First of all, I appreciate having the experts in this discussion. I think that what I'm hearing is that we could be creating another level of bureaucracy. And while we like to be proactive of what might happen, I don't think that creating an ordinance that will do just the opposite, maybe, of confusing folk. When we started talking about marijuana, we were talking about people who were getting locked up and not being able to bail out. Well, it seems that has changed substantially. I am not one to just be putting a policy in place just to, I just don't think we should be doing that. I think we should be listening to the experts tonight, this afternoon. And I just don't think we should be going down this lane at this. If it comes up again, if we have a problem, then we revisit it then. My point. Thank you, sir.
Go ahead, John Donnelly.
Yes, and I don't know what level of or layer of bureaucracy it would be adding. I can't imagine that there's. I mean, it wouldn't require any new prosecutors. It wouldn't require any new police officers. It wouldn't require any new court personnel, as far as I can tell. And I don't know that it sends a mixed message to law enforcement. I mean, it basically just, it sounds to me, and again, I'm not, obviously on the commission, but if the commission were to pass something like this, to me, it's just an indication that this is how ACC wants to, that ACC does not want to criminalize user amounts of marijuana if it becomes legally prosecutable. As going to Commissioner Edwards' question, I think CR answered it, but seems to be that would be a minimal amount of training just to get the word out to the police department that, hey, just because this ordinance passed doesn't mean we need to start issuing citations, because we still can't distinguish between legal hemp and illegal marijuana. So, this is, they just put it on the books in case that becomes something that we can charge later on. And if they do cite people for it, as Solicitor Chisholm mentioned, they're not going to file the case. They're going to dismiss the charges prior to them going to court, it sounds like.
Well, if it's a payoff, hopefully we can get there before they pay it.
Right, that's true.
Right, because if they pay the citation, they're admitting guilt, and that goes on their record.
Right, and I know, John, I know you said that, it's not criminalizing it. There's still the issue. I mean, I think I guess technically it's quasi-criminal, right? A municipal ordinance is quasi-criminal, but the state statute requires even ordinances for violations of marijuana to be reported on criminal histories. And now that's a clerk issue. That's not for you or for me, but that is a clerk issue. And if they're required to submit it, it still would show up on a criminal history.
I understand that. And there are some problems that the commission, if their intent is to do what I think it is, then yes, there are some some issues that they cannot address necessarily. But all I was saying is that I don't know that it necessarily sends a mixed message to law enforcement. I think it's just the message is pretty clear that ACC wants there to be a lesser route for its citizens who are caught in possession of marijuana.
And so I guess
a lesser grade than the state statute. So
Right.
I don't know that that's a pretty.
And I guess what I'm hearing too is that if citations become, if citations start being written and then those citations are paid, then the clerk will be reporting that. It'll go on criminal history. So I guess it does create some sort of balancing. We're wading into the unknown, wondering if citations will start to be written, and then all of a sudden we're having more guilty pleas for simple possession than we did before.
And Commissioner Edwards, I did not mean bureaucracy as far as paperwork and processing. Maybe that was the wrong terminology, Mr. Donnelly. But it sounds like right now, I don't know about tomorrow, right now, we are doing something that is working. That was my point. And I'm just of the opinion about anything. If something works, let it work until you have a problem. Let's not anticipate and confuse folks. So I wasn't talking about bureaucracy as far as paperwork and process, but it seems that the solicitor has given us some good I'm kind of getting a little. That was my point. That was all my point was.
Got it.
So let's be.
Okay, Commissioner Houle.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess I'm not worried about our ability to train our people. I think the police department does a good job of training its people. I think we could also get the word out through the courts and to the clerks. Perhaps there could be some kind of information there on the ready. So when someone's about to pay a citation, they can be made aware of other options for them if they want. And I think if we're going to move forward with this, there's a way that we can also make sure that as we move forward, the directive is given to the manager to make sure all applicable staff are aware of the intention behind this. But right now we're looking at a situation where the improvement we've seen in the data over the past couple of years is thanks to some, gaps in state law and existing equipment that may not always exist. So I see this as an opportunity for us to kind of sew up that hole, so to speak. And, we're also not talking about zero still. I mean, 3 cases is more than 0. However few that is, that's still more than 0. If your house is burglarized 3 times in 3 years, you would not be satisfied that it was only 3. You would want it to be 0, So I think there's a degree to which we're clearly doing better, but I think this is an opportunity to add another good thing to the mix. And when we talk about confusion, I think the greater confusion, honestly, is with the public, who sees a long list of cities in Georgia that have decriminalized, and we are, quite ironically, one of the only ones that hasn't. So I think, if we want to send the message that we're a community who stands on this side of this issue, then there's an importance there as well. And, I don't think anyone who's following this has any confusion about the fact that federal and state law still is what it is. But if we as a community want to be on this side of this issue, then, this is our opportunity to do that in a way that will last throughout whoever changes the seats in these different offices, and regardless of what equipment is developed or purchased or utilized in the future.
One point I had for anyone to chime in, if we created a parallel ordinance here, how could that impact the records of individuals previously convicted? of this charge, if at all? Any sort of records restriction or records modification or, conviction modification? Could any of that be implicated by a change in the law like this?
I hope I'm answering this correctly. If you get two, you can get two restrictions for misdemeanor convictions. That's the most you can get. So if you choose this ordinance to be one that is restricted, if it's showing up on your criminal history, I would think that would be the one of the two that you could have restricted. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, that helps me understand sort of the current state of affairs for records restriction. But I guess I'm more curious in how records restriction might be implicated through a parallel ordinance or municipal ordinance change. Could any changes occur to records restriction through our action to adopt a municipal ordinance? Could a conviction be changed? Or would it just fly under the existing records restriction? You get to restrict 2 misdemeanors. There you go.
The way I understand and read the statute, it's 2 misdemeanor convictions that you can have restricted.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Commissioner
Edwards, I don't think that this would have any effect on
Okay.
the existing ability to restrict records. But I'm not having.
I guess I'm thinking about, the evolving nature of law and how things that were once stricter laws or more punished more severely, now we have an evolving perception of how that should be punished. So how do we not just treat individuals moving forward with less punishment, but change the records of those folks who were punished more severely? But I guess since this is such a low charge anyway to begin with, there's really no implication there. Is that right? Okay.
I think.
Commissioner Edwards.
Yeah.
Carol Myers here, right? Listen, I'm jumped in. Well, I'm at this ACCG training, and can only spend a little while here. And I just wanted to ask a point. Did I miss a pro? Is there a pro screen to this? We're looking at the cons.
Yeah.
Is there a pro? Did we pass that already?
We did.
Okay, then the other question I have is on the cons. I mean, in this kind of situation where we have these other communities have put this ordinance in place, wouldn't they be running into the same issue that Judge Chisholm is referring to? That would be, or Solicitor Chisholm, if I'm using the right word, whatever it is. Excuse me there. But I mean, wouldn't that be applying in all those other places as well? And finally, I just want to point out that John Donnelly put something in the chat that said some citations are court only, meaning that the person can't simply pay it off at the clerk's window. The person cited is required to appear court, at which time it could be dismissed. And I thought that was important information, but I'm wondering about those other communities. Are they running into the same issue, and are people getting citations on their records that would have been dismissed if the local entity did not put in this ordinance?
Commissioner Myers, as we did our comparative analysis with the other communities, we did not look into the actual implementation of law enforcement. We just kind of looked, we took a blanket view of, how their ordinances were set up, established, timing, and things of that nature.
But theoretically, that would be the same situation in these other jurisdictions, I would assume. That's not something that would be special to Clarke County. Is that correct, you people in the courts?
Okay, so I did reach out 3 years ago, I spoke to the prosecutor in Clarkston, the prosecutor in the city of Atlanta, and in the city of Savannah. I have not spoken to them since the hemp bill. So I don't know how they're handling those cases. I don't know if they're using their ordinance or if the officers just aren't making the charges. I haven't reached out to them. So I don't know the answer to how they are handling cases post hemp farming bill.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
So, Solicitor Chisholm, I do have a final question before we move on. The sheriff's office, do they have an opportunity to make arrests related to this as well?
If you're seeing that might occur during a warrant service, or if somebody is crossing jail lines with some marijuana in their pocket, but then that technically is a felony. It'd be about the only time I would see the sheriff's office involved.
Well, we do have a set of questions for the LRC to consider as we move forward and think about next steps. And this will be the final thing that we have, Commissioner Edwards, here, and we'll take your lead from there.
Okay.
The first question we would like the LRC to consider, do we want an ordinance similar to those that we've already researched? And if so, we should think about what we're really trying to accomplish. So maybe those first two questions, can attack those first.
Okay. Yeah, I think that was a pretty good question. That was a good question that Commissioner Myers asked. How have parallel ordinance enforcement in other jurisdictions been affected post state hemp? I certainly would be curious to know that before I take any more action on this item. So,
understood.
Anybody else has any thoughts? Commissioner Wright?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I do believe that there's more for us to study on this to be able to get to some answers to the questions. And Chair Edwards, what you just outlined may be the next bit of information here. I really don't want to put people through something for the hope, for those of us who have been through the court system and you're hoping it might get dismissed, or you're going to get an attorney to help you get it dismissed, and to have kind of what DA Gonzalez has put in the chat. Why put people, the one who's got the citation, through it when we're confident it's going to be dismissed, but the person with the citation doesn't have that confidence. And if if that state hemp farming act has changed so much of it as we learned today, I'm just not sure that we would want to put people through that just knowing it's going to be dismissed, just not even have it, since it's not being enforced.
But wouldn't a citation that's going to later get dismissed be preferable to an arrest?
I thought that the arrests were only at the felony level for distribution and trafficking.
I mean, if in my book, a dismissed citation would be superior to an arrest and everything that an arrest would trigger. Who else has?
So if we get more information to see how this is happening in the groups in the Excel file sheet, is that what you were saying, Chair Edwards, to get more details about how that's executed?
Yeah, I'd like to know how their enforcement and prosecution of their parallel municipal ordinance has been affected by the state's adoption of this hemp bill.
Yeah, me too, as well as the other police departments and the Georgia State Patrol, how that overlap, that last con on the list about how municipal ordinances are not executed by the other police departments or entities. I think that's important overlap as well as more research comes forward. Thank you.
Commissioner Hull?
So to just take these questions in order, do we want an ordinance that's similar to those researched? I would say yes, still. I actually really like that the Chatham County one also mentions drug-related object. I think that's something else we can add into this that would be good. In terms of what we're trying to accomplish, I think we're trying to build off of the current state we're in, which is better than it used to be, but solidify some things a bit more legislatively here on the local level and not rely entirely on who happens to be in these positions at this time. I have some concerns about feeling entirely satisfied with things as they are, given that the way they are seems more tenuous than something that's in writing on the books, I believe. And I believe that what John Donnelly put in the chat earlier, that I think Commissioner Myers mentioned about some citations being only court only, meaning that the person can't simply pay it off at the clerk's window, solves the problem that we're talking about here of if we have an officer for some reason going against the protocol we're assuming will be enacted and does issue a citation, then someone has to appear in court and get it dismissed still, assuming that our courts are still functioning that way. If we're going to kick the can on this longer, I'd like some more information on why we feel we need to stick with just under an ounce. I understand that that's where it goes from misdemeanor to felony, but I'd like to just hear a rationale for that. I'm seeing that everywhere else in the state is that small of an amount. I believe that that's not necessarily the case everywhere in the country. And so I'd like to understand what the implications would be of going to a larger amount. It seems to me somewhat arbitrary if this is a substance that we just don't think is a big deal. It reminds me of Prohibition era. It would be weird to just say, well, you can have a beer, but if you have a whole keg, we're going to arrest you still. I guess I'd just be curious to understand that reasoning. I see Deborah saying that is the law. I guess I'm wondering what law it is that we're referring to and why we have to stick to under an ounce. And then as far as, are there any characteristics in this ordinance that you would like to see? If we do go the citation route, having it be court only, but if there's going to have to be an amount attached still, I think sticking with the lowest amount possible makes sense. Thanks.
Great. Does that give you enough? Any other final thoughts?
The penalty, jail time. So, what other communities are doing, the penalty ranges, we'll say from, $75 to $150. I think it's a little more, maybe $1,000 in one community. Is there a number that you all would prefer?
$1.
Yeah, I'm fine with it being low. If we decide to go that route, yeah.
And just be clear, none of these other communities seem to be requiring jail time. I assume the LRC would like to follow suit.
Yeah.
Commissioner Edwards, that's all we have for this topic today.
Okay. Solicitor Chisholm, did you have something else you wanted to say?
I was just going to say, one, the amount, I know Deborah had mentioned there was legislation, it was House Bill 12 this year. I guess maybe it didn't make it through crossover day, Deborah, because that was supposed to bump it up to 2 ounces for misdemeanor. Otherwise, it's state statute. That's what I think you're seeing, 1 ounce all the time. And it's because 1 ounce is the state definition of a misdemeanor amount of marijuana, or less than 1 ounce.
Right. Okay.
But this 2022 was House Bill 12. If you want to take a look at that, that's out there. The reason I had brought up about people paying off at the ticket window earlier was back when I was in discussions with other commissioners about 3 years ago about all of this. That was the sentiment that I understood. We wanted this to be the least onerous ordinance possible so that people didn't have to come to court. People could go pay a ticket somewhere and leave, maybe even pay it online. If you make it court only, that's not what you're doing. So I'm not advocating one way or the other here. I'm just putting it out there. That's just information. Okay.
Mhm.
The other thing, I do think that you run into this issue, and it was raised earlier about schools. You're going to have kids that have this charge. So do you treat that differently, like underage possession of alcohol, or are they going to get the same thing as somebody that's 21 and over? Those are, that's just something again to think about.
Mhm.
Is how you're going to handle this type of case where you have somebody.
Right. I think we lost the solicitor. All right. I think we need to move on. I think we've got some good input here. Mr. Jones, we're good to go for now?
Yes, sir. I believe we have enough. And, I wanted to say thank you to Solicitor Chisholm, DA Gonzalez, and Mr. Donnelly from the Public Defender's Office for being here today. Really appreciate the time. I know an hour out of your day is a big deal. I'd like to thank the LRC members for giving us time to actually pull this together, because I know that the mayor wanted to move on this pretty quickly, and you guys allowed staff to kind of, take a couple of extra days, if you will, to get this together. So thank you for that. And, Sarah George is the one who put together the comparative analysis pretty quickly. Thanks to her for that as well. So with that, ready to move on to agenda item number 2.
Thank you, Solicitor Chisholm. Thank you, Mr. Donnelly, DA Gonzalez, Deputy Chief Daniel. Y'all were a big help throughout this discussion. So thank you for your time, and look forward to working together on this. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, next item.
All right. The ever fun charge of leaf blowers and looking into the regulations related to gas powered leaf blowers, including as it pertains to our noise ordinance. So quick history on what we've done thus far. We have looked at our existing ordinances, and Mr. Hansford's come before the LRC to talk through, some potential ordinances that may impact gas-powered leaf blowers and the transition to electric. So in our conversations, what we heard from the LRC was, put forward some pros and cons. So that's what we're planning on doing in this presentation. In addition to that, if you guys are if you already have a pilot program, let's kind of talk about those pilot programs. Let's hear about that and see what we're currently doing here in ACC Gov. And then finally, let's talk about some of the budgetary impacts. Before I move on to some of the department presentations related to, how they're using leaf blowers and what their plans are and what the budgetary impacts are, you'll notice in some of the presentations there's a note about a new House bill. Sarah, can we go to the next slide? Central Services will talk about it, but I'm sure that you guys have heard about there's a new House bill in place where House Bill 1301 really saying, hey, leaf blowers, it's a public property type thing, not a private property authority, if you will. And I know that Central Services will go over it, and actually all the departments had it in their presentations, but we're going to let Central Services discuss it first. So you'll be hearing from 3 different departments today: Central Services, Solid Waste, and Leisure Services. 3 of our larger departments, all of which have gas-powered leaf blowers, and all of which have a plan to transition gas-powered to electric. I'll also note there are other departments who utilize leaf blowers as well in our local government, one of them being the airport, but they're not here because they don't have such a large department. That being said, I'll turn it over to Gavin or Andrew to lead this discussion.
Thank you, Manager Jones. I'll go ahead and take this one, and I appreciate the time with the committee today. Based on feedback from our last meeting, we were able to do a little more research into some of the pros and cons surrounding leaf blowers operated by batteries. And we were also able to kind of get into some of the budgetary impacts. Again, this program, regardless of whether it's approved or not, Central Services will be on board with whatever your decision is. We just wanted you to consider the following information as we go forward. From our standpoint, Central Services, Landscape Division, and Facilities account for about 40 different leaf blowers. That's just a small portion of our small engine equipment inventory. We use them on a daily basis, on average about 1.66 hours per day. They are mostly two-cycle gas powered with a few electric battery powered. When we talk about transferring over to something that's other than gas and something that would be battery operated, I think it's important for us to consider the entire inventory, though. I'm not saying that the entire inventory would have to be changed all at once, but like many things that are battery power operated, different tools can be run off of the same battery. And so if we're going to invest in equipment like leaf blowers that are run off of a battery, I think it would be important for us to also consider how that would translate to some of our other equipment and whether or not we would need to buy separate brands or separate batteries for those other types of equipment. There's also what we would consider a phased implementation approach, given that our entire inventory for the most part is gas powered. We think we will eventually strive to get to 100% inventory in terms of battery operation, but that's going to take some time. It's going to take some dollars. And we also want to be able to keep some of the equipment that we have. It's not bad equipment. It certainly runs fine for the time being. We wouldn't look to replace it necessarily, but while we have it, we can find a use for it, whether that's in a backup scenario or if there's an emergency and we need spare equipment. So we would like permission built into any sort of policy going forward that allows for that continued use, at least for a limited amount of time. And then there's just that replacement life cycle consideration where gas equipment, may go faster than electric equipment in terms of its overall replacement, but batteries certainly will be replaced on a more frequent basis in between there. And that's from our experience in some of the industry standard. The next slide, please. Let's see. Do we want to go back to the other one at all, Sarah, maybe? There we go. So again, not to touch on what Manager Jones had already said, but there is, what I think with the House legislation that's currently going through, we don't know how that will end up. But if it does end up that way, I'm not sure, an ordinance would necessarily be the route that we would take if we were to phase in a policy about Athens-Clarke County government usage of leaf blowers. We do think that's something that maybe could just be an internal policy that perhaps comes out of this board that allows for some oversight by manager and departments, but even some periodic modification depending on how things go down the road. There's certainly pros that we agree with in terms of safety, as well as the environmental friendly effects of using battery operated equipment. There are some cons though. Some of this may go away in time as we learn more about the equipment itself and test it out. But certainly there's costs right now in this economy. There's delivery time and availability that is certainly an issue. There's also the durability, compatibility, and reliability that are just some unknowns at this point in time. We've been using gas-powered equipment for a long time. We're familiar with it. That's not to say it needs to stay that way, but that's what we've become accustomed to. And we just want to make sure that the type of battery equipment that we would go to can meet that same demand and doesn't necessarily affect services and operations that we deliver in a timely manner. We would have to make some changes to our facilities and where the equipment is stored. That includes charging locations, charging rooms, certainly some electrical modifications. I know here in the buildings and grounds facility, we'd probably be looking at about a $5,000 to $10,000 capital investment in the facility to account for a number of batteries and some of that infrastructure that's needed. And then there may be an increased outsourcing of repairs just until we get a grasp on what sort of maintenance is usually involved in these as we go along. We're not quite certain whether our mechanics are currently able or capable to handle these, or if they're in some ways even allowed to based on warranties that would go along with some of this equipment. And we just need to keep in mind some of the conditions that we would be operating in. Certainly, we can still run a gas powered leaf blower in some of the wetter, damp conditions. Yet to be considered is whether the battery operations can handle that as well. So, next slide, please. Just from a budgetary standpoint, between Leisure Services and Central Services, prior to this being even a topic before the committee, we had actually put forth an initiative for this upcoming fiscal year in which we were proposing to jointly request $26,000 for a multi-year initiative to change a lot of our equipment over in an introductory phase. This wasn't just for leaf blowers alone, but whether that was chainsaws or weed eaters, things like that. And again, this came about prior to the topic being placed on the agenda, but good timing, I guess. If we were to consider a 100% changeover to electric leaf blowers as of right now, for example, and not phase in that approach and tackle the entire inventory just for Central Services, which again is over 40 blowers, we'd be looking at about $110,000 capital investment and probably around $40,000 in annual operating, which is more of a worst case scenario based on some of the inventory and brands that we have researched. So our recommendation to the committee, for what it's worth, would be to sort of pilot this program and phase it in over time along with the amount of inventory that we would tackle every year. So that has yet to be discussed, and certainly we would need to also account for some associated budget increases for those capital and operating expenses. But that's from a Central Services standpoint. So I can certainly turn it over to some of those other departments.
All right. Should we just keep going, or what do you think, Mr. Jones? You're muted, I guess.
Yep. Gavin, quick point of clarification. Sorry. You guys have already started this process, correct, of transitioning to electric power?
A very small amount. Over the years, we have purchased a handful of electric powered blowers, but it was nothing that was a pilot program, a formal pilot program, or anything like that.
Didn't we put some budget money into this last year?
That was not for Central Services. I believe that was for a different department.
Okay.
I believe it was solid waste.
Okay. Yeah, I guess just I'll just share one quick reaction on this presentation, and then we can keep going through, because I know we need to get out of here at a reasonable hour. But one thing that strikes me about this presentation is it's very numbers heavy. It's very economic heavy. And as I mentioned before, I'm most concerned about the health costs to our workers for using these machines. And I would like to sort of stress the harms that are created by gas blowers. And there's studies, research, medical opinions showing the slurry of gas and oil that these two-stroke engines burn has high levels of carcinogenic material. The ultrafine particulate matter that's thrust into the air with these 200-mile-per-hour winds enter your bloodstream. So that research is out there. The at least 85 decibel level volume of these machines creates permanent hearing loss, permanent hearing damage after 2 hours of operation. So I guess I'd kind of like us all to be on the same page when it comes to just sort of an initial recognition that these are dangerous machines, these are harmful machines, and kind of have that go into the calculation. Like, I know it's going to cost money to get new machines, but we need to be thinking about, I would like for us to think about the safety of the workers, the safety of people who are around these machines, inhaling the exhaust, inhaling these particles. So thanks. Let's keep it on.
Yes, sir. We can keep on. And at the end, you'll see a staff recommendation. And Commissioner Edwards, we certainly agree with you. And our recommendation should show that.
Thanks.
So I'm not sure if Suki's here or she has a proxy present.
I'm here, Manager Jones. I
Okay.
just can't use my camera if that's all right, you all. And I'm not going to be repetitive to what Gavin just went over, but just sharing with you the equipment that we have. Of course, we purchased 4 battery-powered leaf blowers, and we have started our pilot. It's in month 2. And we use those leaf blowers downtown 7 days a week, approximately 2.5 hours per unit. It does fluctuate fall. It kind of increased that average tremendously when we had more trees downtown. So that average will change now that we don't have quite as many trees that are as mature as they were historically. But since we are in the second month of our pilot, we are having some challenges with battery life. Part of that is we're having to store the batteries in the parking deck, so it's not climate controlled, and batteries do better when they're in a climate control environment for charging. So we are working on that. We do have one backpack leaf blower, our battery powered, that's already broken down. It's still under a warranty, but we're struggling just a little bit finding somebody that will repair that. So just things that we knew that could happen are happening a little bit to us in our second month of the pilot. Battery life is the biggest challenge for us. Definitely.
Yes, sorry, Ms. Jansen. Let me just, if
Go
I
ahead.
could interrupt you. The storing the batteries in the climate control just has to be done. I mean, if they're not in a climate control, they're going to be damaged, and yeah, we won't have good battery life. So I think that needs to absolutely be a priority, because all these batteries will be destroyed if they're not kept in a climate controlled environment. I mean, especially with temperatures that get below freezing. I know we've had that a couple times the past couple months. So that deeply concerns me. I mean, the batteries are the most expensive part of this equipment, so they absolutely have to be kept in a climate controlled area. Thank
And
you.
we think we have, Commissioner Edwards, I agree. We think we're going to have to move our charging stations that we have to the Charm. So that's on the periphery of downtown. We feel like we have a solution to that. We were hoping that we could use downtown parking in some way, shape, or form, and that didn't work out for us. So I think we have a good, solid plan B that we'll put into action. So that's, if you would, Sarah or Manager Jones, the next slide, Gavin, good, it is my budget. In FY22, you all already approved $4,000 additional dollars in our budget for $10,500 total. And so that's where we got the money to purchase this first round of leaf blowers. And again, we didn't ask for any additional money this coming budget cycle, because we will have the $10,500. And if we need to get a different type of leaf blower, we feel like we could do that with the funds that are already in our account. So that's where we're at, and we'd be happy to update you all as we progress during our pilot. And we did not put any of the health aspects in here, Commissioner Edwards, but we could definitely look at that the next time we come to the LRC.
Well, I'm definitely interested in the health aspects, because blowing downtown on the sidewalk and blowing the streets, I mean, that's probably the most harmful place to be using the tool, because of the brake dust and other just debris that accumulates on our roads that gets put into the air and breathed in by our employees. And we've got to be talking about that aspect of it. I think just the employee safety aspect, and we've got to really make it a priority to responsibly store the batteries, because it's just not going to work if we don't have climate control for the batteries. I mean, we're going to waste a lot of money. So.
Understood. And I apologize, you all. I do have to bounce off, but Nancy Flowers is on if there are any other questions for solid waste. She's our route supervisor.
Thanks, Suki. Appreciate that. And the final part of the presentation will be leisure services.
All right.
So I'm Alex Bond, and I'm going to speak on behalf of the slides here. So we have leaf blowers all throughout all of our facilities. They are spread across the county. For the purposes of the discussion, we have purchased one of the 3,000 backpack blowers. It is a fully electric battery, one giant battery that is the backpack. We're using it. Central Services came over and borrowed it for a day or two, tried it out. For us, it is a good fit, because you got to think what we're doing a lot is the intermittent kind of spot blowing out of shelter before a rental. We just did a construction project and need to blow the ground after that. So where other departments do have situations that lend themselves to maybe batteries not being the best, I do think for us, the batteries seem to work or could work pretty well. We have bought the one commercial grade battery backpack battery, and we do have a couple residential ones that we've kind of bought piecemeal. But if you'll go to the next slide, please. You can see here, we've also looked at what it would cost in order to phase out the gas power to move to a battery powered in both a backpack and handheld, because we do use both formats throughout all of our different parks. We've looked at a 3-year possible implementation, and Gavin did speak about looking at some initial numbers for a phase that we did put in with budget this past cycle. Right now, we do not have any approved budget to actually implement this idea, but when looking at what it would take to do it across all of our cost centers, this is what we came up with, possibly doing it for both backpack and handheld. We do think that some of the gas-powered ones we have could be traded in, possibly taken for surplus, and maybe those funds could help offset the cost. But like others, there would be a couple key areas we'd probably want to keep 1 or 2 of the gas-powered ones, mainly in our park maintenance department. They could use battery ones as well, but there are some times when they're working on a large project or getting pools ready for the season where they really may need the backup of having the gas. That's short and quick for us.
Thank you, Alex. Next slide, please. So that being said, after discussion with staff, as you heard, there are 3 different departments kind of doing 3 different things. However, they're really doing the same thing, really trying to transition from gas powered to electric. And that being said, we talked and we thought about what should we do, and it sounds like a 1-year pilot would be a good first start. And let me explain what that pilot would be. Starting from January 2022, this year, going to January 2023, we would start implementing electric powered leaf blowers, and many of our departments have already done so. So we will continue to do so. And by the end of this year, we will come back and report. This is what we propose to do, is come back and report to the LRC on how things are going. Now, over the course of the year, we're going to think about things like effectiveness of the tool, and to your point, Commissioner Edwards, considerations around health. So, you mentioned inhaling some of this dust and debris. We certainly can ensure that our folks are wearing masks and protective gear to help mitigate that. But we also are cognizant of, there may be additional technology that comes out as well this year or the following years that we might want to implement as it relates to better battery life, for example. And thank you for bringing up, and I know Suki had already mentioned that she's going to look into a better environment to store the batteries as well. So that's our recommendation. We plan on doing this over a 3-year period. I saw in Gavin's slide that the 20% mark, we would ask Central Services to think about a 33% mark so we can do it over a 3-year period. And the reason why this presentation was so number heavy, Commissioner Edwards, because we want to make sure that LRC members, Mayor and Commission understood that there would be a budgetary impact here because the batteries do cost more.
Great. I certainly, for the next meeting, I want assurances from all staff that the batteries are being properly stored. I don't want to get caught in an embarrassing situation of this government purchasing equipment that doesn't work because we didn't store it properly. We need to read the directions and make sure everybody's on board with protecting these batteries because they are the most valuable component, most expensive component of these machines. So I want that to be part of the education strategy throughout the government, that these batteries are taken care of. That they have to be brought inside when it's cold outside or they will be destroyed. So that's certainly a priority for me. Next meeting, I want to see more staff recognition of the health ramifications for our employees, for the continued usage of gas leak blowers, and the assurances that those recognitions are being communicated throughout the government and that sufficient PPE is required for the operators of those machines, and that we are using the machines at times when guests to our parks and other members of the public are not around, so that we don't have to then have the responsibility to provide PPE to members of the public who are around when we're doing the gas blowing. Anything else from committee members? Jesse, Commissioner Hull?
Yeah, I guess I'll just say, my feelings on this topic have been, variable, we'll say. And I think I'm still kind of, when it comes to like what we might do in terms of regulation in private spaces, I'm looking forward to that discussion because I feel mixed. But when it comes to our own staff and our own facilities, I feel, strongly on board with us getting to the electric leaf blowers. I feel a bit like I understand some of the plight that some of staff has conveyed around trying to get efficiently through a large amount of space or something, but like these tools are definitely carcinogenic and are definitely harmful to the environment, to species that they kill, in addition to the CO2 emissions and things. I mean, there's just I think, some stuff I've read, thanks to Commissioner Edwards sharing a lot about, bees having the wings ripped off their bodies by these things and stuff. And so it's often our departments that are most in charge of beautifying our community that are going to be using these. And I think there's a grand irony in using a tool that's actually destroying the environment and harming the health of our own staff at the same time. So I do hope that we will, phase out the use of gas power blowers entirely, maybe look at some acceptance of a little bit of debris on the ground is not the worst thing, or, accept that might take people a bit more time and then figure out a way to staff up accordingly. So saving my thoughts on private sphere for another day, in terms of the things that are definitely within our purview, it seems quite clear to me that we should try to get away from the gas powered entirely. And I think the other points about batteries and stuff are well taken. Thanks.
Commissioner Wright?
Thank you. I appreciate staff's updating us on progress in this direction. Chair Edwards, when you listed the things that you wanted to see for the next meeting, it's more for our education, and then do you see us making a report on the pilot or what we're learning about getting our house in order? Do you see that there would then a report would emerge so that the whole commission learns what we've been, a condensed version of what we're learning?
That sounds good to me.
Okay, I just wanted to know the direction because it doesn't sound like we're. So we'll just continue to learn and then get a concise report after we've heard what you've asked. Okay.
That sounds good to me. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. So we don't need a motion for anything right now. We're just.
I don't think so. Yeah, I think we're still just working through it.
Unless you want a motion to adjourn.
Yeah, after I hear from Mr. Jones, sure.
Thank you, Commissioner Edwards. And I'd like to kind of go over a couple of things just to make sure staff heard you correctly and we can come back with the right information and we can start with the second agenda item. So at the next meeting, am I hearing correctly that kind of a PPE plan, a storage plan, and maybe a kind of a purchase plan is what y'all are looking for?
Yes. And a health education plan for the employees, you know, not just the PPE, but of course the communicating why the PPE is necessary, you know, raising awareness of the harms of these machines.
Would we also be getting budget considerations so that we as a group can help get the equipment that's needed for us to make this shift?
Yeah, maybe just refining some of that. I mean, staff did great today, you know, giving us the numbers in the budget. That was certainly informative. You know, Gavin telling us how many blowers are out there. And so I think we got a good foundation on the economic impacts and the budgetary impacts.
So if the group is okay with staff's recommendation of a 3-year phased approach and the first year of a pilot, we can put together what it would cost in the first year to purchase these items.
Yeah. You know, my gut, you know, I'm feeling 3 years is, I'd like us maybe to push a little harder. You know, 3 years, that's a little long. I mean, I think when we talk next month about the emissions emitted from these machines, you know, we've got this 100% Athens. We're talking about trying to be responsible stewards of the government. We're putting solar panels everywhere. We're doing a lot of great work. This goes along with it. You know, this is a piece of that work, you know, phasing out the use of these 2-stroke engines as expeditiously as possible. So I'd really like us to explore, you know, making a responsible move, just like we're getting great headlines here, phasing in solar panels. I mean, looking at that presentation of solar panels going to cover the Classic Center Arena, I'd like us to kind of address this with a similar aptitude and diligence.
Certainly. So, you know, I think we had planned on a 3-year approach would be 33%, you know, every year as far as the budget. So if we go with a 2-year approach, you know, call it 50% a year to the final product, would that suffice?
I'd like to see, comparisons. That'd be nice.
Okay. Perfect. And the final thing I have is related to the marijuana decriminalization discussion, just to make sure that, you know, I heard everything correctly. And of course, there are more things. But really, you know, as it relates to jail time, I think we all agree, no jail time, or the LRC all agrees, no jail time. A penalty, very minimal, if any. And I heard Commissioner Houle say $1. You know, we'll come back, you know, with something after talking to the attorney's office. And then, you know, Commissioner Houle, was your question answered related to the rationale of the 1 ounce question?
Not exactly, but Attorney Hines offered to get in touch after with either a conversation or a memo, so I think that'll cover it. But, you know, while we're here, I don't know if since I'm on the mic, something related to the decriminalization of associated substances, you know, like the paraphernalia seems important to me. And then if there's a way to also address the probable cause question of like that, you know, the smell or whatever of marijuana is not seen as probable cause for other crimes. So for like kind of decriminalizing this in general, that some language around that would be helpful, especially if there's examples to pull from.
So drug-related object in Chatham County is something that I had that you wanted us to look at. And the final thing was, you know, study how other jurisdictions / courts handle the implementation. Is that?
Yeah, especially post the state hemp law. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. It would be interesting also to learn if they had to modify what they had already on the books, the ones that had something prior to it, learning what might have gotten modified for that point, Chair.
Yep. Good.
That's all I have.
All right, great. Any objection to adjourn?
Nope.
All right, let's adjourn. Thank you,
Aye.
staff members, for your diligent presentation and participation, taking time out of your day to share your thoughts with us. Very helpful. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.